Y2K Futurism is an aesthetic that emerged in the late 90s and early 2000s that consists of the color silver, consumer electronics, large sunglasses, and blobjects. Its depictions of what the future could look like in the 2000s were utopian and optimistic, simultaneously celebrating the new millennium and the early internet. Like McBling, Y2K Futurism was first identified by a Facebook group in the mid-2010s, whose core members later went on to start the Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute. And for this week's episode, we have a good Pinterest board. I recommend everyone look at it so they get an idea of what this aesthetic looks like.
Yeah, it's a very it's a very commercial aesthetic. Like a lot of stuff is just drawn from like advertisements and music videos largely. As we'll get into, I think we had mentioned this aesthetic lightly in the McBling episode because it shares some time in common. But kind of like McBling, it's seen more in TV and in celebrity culture than it is like in the real world. The few ways which it does touch the real world are interesting though.
Yeah, this was the first one to be identified by Kari, but all of the aesthetics they've identified, they have a consumer element. That's the consumer part.
So it's
Consumer
Kari
Aesthetics Research Institute.
Okay,
Yeah. So this one, like, I agree though, it is like largely celebrities who would wear the clothing. Yeah, it's not quite as much streetwear. And Y2K Futurism, it's attached to the idea of the year 2000 and the new millennium. So before we get to the actual aesthetic, let's talk about New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
How were our New Year's Eves?
Pretty bad. How was yours, Nathan?
Very uneventful. We both probably, I think you got invited to Kamara's party, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that didn't happen. She got sick. And then I just stayed home because I get nervous about drunk drivers and I don't want to get killed on New Year's Eve. But both of us are now sick, actually, while we're recording this episode.
Yeah, we both got a little bit of the sniffles right now. Yeah, starting like, I guess this was the morning of New Year's Eve. I was just like sweating through the night and like terrible stomach pains. And then I was like, oh my God, I have food poisoning. I get this like every few years or so and it just completely wrecks me. And then so I just spent like New Year's Eve just throwing up. I probably fell asleep at like 9 p.m., 10 p.m. or something. I just woke up delirious at like 7 a.m. the next day in the new year. It's a pretty terrible way to kind of bring in the new year. And I just started feeling better like on Saturday or so. But now like I got some sniffles coming on too. So I'm like, all right, cool. Right from what was either food poisoning or norovirus into just a bog standard cold. Like, let's do this. Like I kind of almost have this like just fighting spirit towards like making 2025 a good year, even though I'm kind of starting it at a deficit.
Yeah, no. This year already, we're like 5 days in. Already, like I have a new job, a new position. I've scheduled 2 vacations. I got sick. I went rock climbing for the first time.
Yeah.
I'm having a busy new year.
Yeah. I was released from my like apartment lease due to my landlord admitting the water damage is too bad and they have to like fully gut the unit. So now I'm like apartment hunting in January, which is a strange place to be in. Yeah. New beginnings. Definitely.
Yeah. And there's a point I want to make about holidays that I haven't found an opportunity to say on the podcast until now. But, you know, when you're a young kid, time is slow. The build up to a holiday feels like it lasts a really long time, like the 30 days to Halloween or Christmas. And then the actual day of is memorable because time is slower. But then as an adult, I feel like it just goes by so quickly. But recently, this past year, I finally saw how to really experience holidays as an adult, which is you need to go to like a bunch of house parties over the course of a week or two. And then you start to be like, oh yeah, this is how you experience Halloween or Thanksgiving with multiple Thanksgivings and Friendsgivings. Like, it makes it more memorable.
No, I definitely like stretching out holidays. Yeah, we just had Hanukkah as well. Like a very nice placement of Hanukkah. I like when it is around Christmas, though I do think it should end before New Year's. I think it's kind of an overlong Hanukkah if it ends on like the 2nd. Yeah. But no, I like that. Especially like being in the working world for a while now, like I kind of get the rhythm of like, oh yeah, first 2 weeks of December, that's the company Christmas party, you know, usually like before people take their vacations, and then like some kind of party with friends, and then like a family thing. Like it feels between like work, chosen family, and biological family. Like there's at least 3 instances of each holiday, and I like that kind of like stretching out of it. It feels good.
Yeah, for me as a Chicago native, holidays often feel a bit more low-key because I don't travel for them. Especially like Christmas, I suppose. But New Year's Eve, I think it has such limited potential because the reason to celebrate is so intrinsically linked to one day. Like you can try to do a New Year's Eve party the day before. I would have gone to Camara's party had it happened, but overall, I just think, I like New Year's Eve conceptually. I think it's cool to have a New Year's resolution. I like the color scheme of jewel tones and metallics, but I don't think it's ever going to be a standout holiday because you're not going to be celebrating it the week before.
I just like that it's the one thing that like brings like the whole world together because everyone's on the Gregorian calendar. I'd actually read an article in the past that hardline conservatives in Israel were pretty mad at the secular New Year becoming a bigger and bigger deal in Israel because they wanted everyone to really focus on Rosh Hashanah, like the lunar New Year in the Jewish calendar. But it just shows like, no, you can't stop the rolling of the ball. Like everyone loves January 1st. Everyone loves the conventional New Year's.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a map recently of what the year is in different countries depending on their system. A lot more of them didn't say 2025 than I expected. Like some of them didn't make sense. I feel like Eritrea was like its year 17 or something.
Do they really mean that? That is the ultimate like fascist government move though, is to like restart the calendar when you take office or something. That's like I remember like Japanese guns in World War II are named like the Type 17 or something because it was year 17 when the gun was made and like in their calendar because they like reset it when they like reestablished the monarchy and stuff. Yeah, it's always just a very like big move to do a year
very
zero in your culture.
Yeah. So back to Y2K Futurism. So how did it all start? So with Y2K Futurism, it first was started as a Facebook group called Y2K Esthetic by Evan Collins. We're scheduled to have him on the podcast in the near future.
Yeah.
We're really excited about that. But this Facebook group, it kind of popped off, and a lot of people I went to school with at SAC joined it. I still have 34 mutuals in it to this day. And this aesthetic was popular to talk about just in everyday conversation at the time. But amongst friends, we'd usually just say Y2K because it's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
And for this episode, Kari, they call it Y2K aesthetic still. But I just think Y2K Futurism is a better description of what it is because it had to do with the future, you know?
Yeah, it's not just the time period. It's like also this look. Because there's a lot of different like Y2K looks. Specifically like when you Google Y2K, you just get a lot of like Temu fashion stuff of just low cut like cargo pants. And that's like not what we're talking about. Exactly. Like, no, it's more about chrome.
Yeah, like the Gen Z interpretation of Y2K is fun to see. I like it. It makes me smile, but they're getting a lot of things wrong. It's like very off.
Hey kids, love what you're doing. You are not following the basics.
Yeah. And I made one post ever. I'll link it in the show notes. I found this like limited 2 shirt in a thrift store that I thought was very Y2K aesthetic. But I didn't really participate much. I'm glad I'm finally talking about it on today's episode. But there was one major way that the IRL community at SAC overlapped with the Y2K aesthetic community. There was someone who went to school while I was a student named Terrell Joseph Davis. He was an SAC student, a foundational artist of the Neo Y2K movement, and an admin on the Y2K Facebook group. And he tragically passed away in 2020 at 22 years old. But he accomplished a lot in his lifetime. I'm going to link a paper magazine obituary of sorts that like chronicles what he did. Like he made the cover art for a song that Sophie helped produce and did a bunch of like really cool projects.
Yeah, amazing work. Like this is such like a mature artist. I don't know how like that would just kill me if I was at SAIC and I was seeing what other students were cranking out like that. Like that's amazing stuff.
Yeah, because there were some students, well, I was a student who they were recognized as having succeeded already as an artist before they even graduated, and he was one of them. He wasn't someone I got to know, but he had this like allure to him when I'd see him in public, because it would be like, oh yeah, he's like kind of famous.
It just like his work just has such a deep understanding. It feels like we talked about like historic reenactment in the past of that one girl who was doing like the McBling look on TikTok, and down to her like the words she'd use or like the devices she'd have in the background were also period perfect. Like his compositions like balance like technical skill and then just like deep knowledge of the subject matter. It's funny that the subject matter is just like consumer plastic stuff from 2002, but like it's just amazing work. I don't know.
Yeah. And the majority of them are still lives, but he had so many different projects. So next we can start out with the elements of Y2K Futurism, but you started out by posing a question.
Yeah, I think that like the whole futurist aspect of this comes from a line of thinking I see in some music videos which is as we got close to the year 2000, everyone instantly started thinking about the year 3000.
Yeah.
Basically, like they kind of like, all right, let's jump ahead to the next bit. And because I think it's kind of the style of thinking of like, the year 2000 is very different from the year 1000. It's probably going to be more similar to the year 3000 than anything else. And that just kind of like, I think was maybe a starting point for some people, and thinking about like, no, we're not just thinking about the next few decades, we're thinking about the far future, like something just so far removed from our current experience.
Yeah. I mean, you can even see that with the name of Andre 3000.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And the song, not written by Jonas Brothers, Year 3000. I forget who it was made famous by them, but I forget who actually wrote it. But yeah. There was just a kind of like a millennial futurist approach.
You know what's my preferred way to think about what the future might look like? The ancient Romans actually thought that the future would involve less technology, that we would become so enlightened to the point that we didn't need material objects as much as we do. And so I prefer visions of the future that are unconventional in that way, where we're not giving into what Silicon Valley thinks, like we're going to actually not use technology less than we do now.
Yeah, I remember seeing this like Victorian illustration of what the future would look like. And it was people in the future looking at like old art. And all the people are wearing like loincloths and have body paint on and have like crazy hats. And I'm like, this is not far off. Like, this is not insane. Like if you walk through Bushwick, like people have crazy tattoos, are wearing like fishnets and like overalls and stuff and have a dumb hat. Like, it's just,
it's like
there.
The Capitol from the Hunger Games.
Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of look.
Yeah. So the first element is chrome and the color silver. So this predates Y2K Futurism by a mile. People have been using these colors to depict the future for a long time just because of modernity's intrinsic connection to metal. But there's something about chrome specifically where it really does feel like you wrote something that was really, I think, really accurate, where you said something about how it feels like it's never going to corrode, and it just like has this unbridled optimism.
We talked about this in the fast food episode, but like stainless steel, and because like chromium is the element that's like used in stainless steel to give it that like not tarnishing effect.
Yeah.
It just always conveys cleanliness and future. And so like you can see chrome and shining metal aspects as far back in science fiction as like pulp science fiction covers from like the 10s and 20s, like pre-war sci-fi and even the post-war stuff. And I think it was pretty common up until Star Wars, which had the kind of like dilapidated future look. You would still see some chrome elements, but like, tarnished or covered in something. Like C-3PO is, like shining gold, I think. Yeah, in the original trilogy. But then that's like served to juxtapose against like the dirtiness of the Jawas and Tatooine and all that stuff. I guess I gotta watch with like getting too deep into Star Wars stuff, but it's a cultural touchstone. I'm not like a Star Wars slop consumer. I just think everyone should have a baseline knowledge of it.
There's a lot more I could say about Star Wars. I'll hold back, but I do think that Star Wars as an aesthetic, it now just reads as Star Wars, but if you step back, you start to see that it's sort of steampunk. That's not really the way to say it, but it's sort of post-apocalyptic in this way that I can see how it was very innovative at the time.
Yeah, it really made like just immediately sooner works like Barbarella and Logan's Run, which was an early 70s, maybe late 60s sci-fi movie. Those had a lot more like people in polyester jumpsuits as opposed to like the very like heavy cotton robe that Luke Skywalker wears. Like there's just a hokiness that like it now feels in comparison to Star Wars.
Yeah.
But then with Y2K, like we kind of had this return to the like unblemished, like not that there weren't like the uses of dystopias or apocalypses, we'll get into in other Y2K stuff and dark Y2K, but it was more of that like ray gun futurism, that kind of like shiny, untarnished futurism, like not complicated by the real world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next element we can talk about is consumer electronics. So not all consumer electronics from this time period are Y2K futurism. The ones that fit in this aesthetic, they were designed to look futuristic with that intention. Like the Harman Kardon speakers and the Kef speakers by Ross Lovegrove come to mind. And another really strong example are the early Macintosh computers from the time that have the clear features and the bright colors. Like those 5 colors that the Macintosh desktops came out in, those give you a good idea of how the Y2K futuristic color palette could go past just silver, like that really nice translucent blue and that green and pink.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like consumer electronics before this, I think I had talked about like how I like 90s consumer goods, like cameras were these like, very angular, black, tightly designed. Like this is a very mature level. Like things were getting like less blocky than in the 80s, but not as blobby as in the 2000s. And this is when the blobbiness begins, essentially. We'll talk about blobjects in a second. But yeah, things were pushing towards a clear, aqua-like kind of look. And then this was, I think, we said that not every device looked like this. Like this was also the time of the yellowed, thick, Dell desktop computer.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, like having the yellowed computer and then having like a CD player with like a, shiny blue element on it. And it was like very silver. And I think that this was companies trying to differentiate between like kind of boring enterprise commercial electronics that you'd have to use at work and then like fun time electronics. Like there's that, I don't know, people tweet about this of like, I hate looking at bad screen at work. I just want to be at home where I can go look at good screen. And the devices all look the same, like from your work computer to your home computer, whatever you have. But I think this was like a fun time of bifurcation.
Yeah, I mean, even me at work, I get to look at my phone a lot, honestly. And I'll be at work being like, man, I wish I could just go home and lay down and look at my phone. Even though I'm doing the same thing here.
No.
But with Macintosh computers, actually, they've always had an association with being like a good computer for creatives. Because my dad, he was a professional photographer. He still is, actually. But he got a client to buy him not one, but two Macintosh desktops back in the 90s. When they cost like $5,000 each.
Wow.
And he argued that he needed them in order to do something with photography. I don't know what. Yeah. But even back then they were used, because to this day, designers will be like, oh yes, I need a Mac because I use Adobe products.
Yeah,
and there's still that connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, my mom had a Lisa 2 computer. And she said it was like an early Mac. And she had a leather backpack for it. Like this was not a laptop at all. This was like a desktop computer. So she had this like square backpack. She said she got it when she went back to school. But no, like Apple started off as the one for like the little guy, the computer for the little guy, because they were more open source friendly, which feels crazy to say nowadays. But yeah, it was this idea that like creatives, whether programming wise or generating visual art wise, wanted something that would control their tools a little better. And then I think they've been leveraging on that past ever since. Like they kind of built up that early momentum and then just all the tools started being in that environment. And now they just kind of still are there. Like it's just, if you want to use logic.
That might be the case because early software companies like IBM were far more proprietary. Yeah. And then sort of the last gasp of the antitrust movement, the last thing that they really did was unbundle software and do certain things that made things more open. So by the time Macintosh came on the scene, they were embracing that freedom that they had a bit more probably.
Yeah, and then like Apple just, if given the choice between user freedom and a consistent quality user experience, they'll always choose the latter. They always want to have the walled garden of like internal stuff. Like Steve Jobs didn't even want to have an app store. Like he wanted to control the experience to that extent. He had to be like lobbied to include and let people sideload stuff. He wanted everyone to just run stuff on web apps, so it wouldn't like touch the perfect like actual software.
Yeah, and these Macintosh computers, the aesthetic of them, it fits into the clear craze, which is something we mentioned on our 8th episode, Silicon Valley aesthetics. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this was popular around Y2K still, because if you think about it, it was sort of like the technology underneath the surface was becoming more transparent, and it was having a bigger role in the real world. Like, I feel like that was maybe why it looked cool and it kind of fits into Y2K Futurism.
Yeah. We had said when we first talked about like the clear trend was that it was trying to show like transparency and trust. Yeah. And I wonder if it really like is always that case, because I don't think people had that big of a fear of technology back then. I don't think technology had to sneak its way in. It was fun. It was something people wanted to engage with. I think that clear also has like, I don't know, it's just fun to look at wires. It's the part of it there too. So my car, 2007 Volvo V50, it's at the end of the model year, but I think the chassis and stuff is like from 2002. But the console, like where the little controls are and stuff, is a pretty 2000s-y kind of dull silver, but they sold, and it's extremely hard to find online, a clear version of it that was called Iced Aqua, which is just the most like, that's what everything was called back then. Everything was the Ice Aqua, breath, air. kind of stuff. But they're impossible to find online. If anyone can source me one, please.
Your car
Let me know.
doesn't have it?
No, I don't have it. No, mine is
I was
just
thinking, I was like, how did I ever notice that
yeah,
versus
yeah.
car before?
No, but it's funny because sometimes like I think the desire of this aesthetic did not match the actual technology, because like even if you had this very like clear, cool, futuristic panel, the actual screen on my car is a like calculator, like Game Boy screen, like not Game Boy Color, like two colors, yellow background, like dark elements. It flips during nighttime. But yeah, I think that like their reach exceeded their grasp with the technology.
I mean, the technology for cars, it was just improving by the year back then. But I remember when I was a kid, one time my grandpa picked me up from school and I got in his car. And he was like, "You'll never believe this. My car has a cassette player in it." I was like, it just sounded so dated.
I always like, I don't know, being in my old car, whenever I'm in like a new, like within the past 2 or 3 years car, I feel like a caveman who's been abducted by a UFO, because like I'm just not used to the level of technology in there, like all the screens and stuff, and that like there's no actual like dials anymore. It's all just like graphics.
Yeah,
I don't know, we've
kinda
gone too
disturbing.
far. But yeah, other car stuff, I always think about the new Beetle, which is I think that was the late 90s. The VW released it, and it was just very fun and rounded. All the ads for it are very like zany Y2K futurist, but of the more Fruitiger Aero nature bent. Like the car itself actually had a little glass vase in it that you could put a flower in, which I thought was cute.
Really?
Yeah.
Like built into the car.
Into the car. Yeah. It had whimsy from like standard. It had stock OEM, original equipment manufacturer, like whimsy. I'd say.
That's so cool.
And then also the smart car came around this time too, which I moved to Germany in 2001. So we did not have those in America. And then I moved to Europe and we had them everywhere. And I just think in general, Europe like took this Y2K aesthetic and ran with it in a way that America couldn't keep up with. Groups like Aqua really come to mind. Like I think that Europe, I mean, the EU was formed in 93. So it was really like gaining steam and trying to be a true cultural, not just economic union. And I think that they were looking for kind of aesthetics and things to tie everyone together. And futurism is always good to tie groups of people together because it doesn't rely on a shared past at all, just a shared future.
Really good take. And I feel like Y2K futurism, it persisted in Europe in following movements like Eurodance in different ways. I can see how it kind of persisted. Yeah,
just like it felt very jarring to go from like the Phoenix suburbs where like homes were all like stucco, neo-eclectic with like pitched roofs and stuff. And then just our house in Germany was a lot newer and like more modern seeming.
Yeah.
And just like, the electronics coming out at the time, it felt like I was kind of stepping into the future a little bit more, even though like things were smaller and like not as like big and American. It just felt like this was like the next step. And I mean, we traveled a lot being in Europe, and so we spent a lot of time in airports. And as we'll get into, like that's like the way you can physically see like Y2K stuff in its time.
Yeah. And another element of Y2K futurism is large sunglasses. So these often, they mimic the shape of alien eyes, I feel like. And then the actual frames, they're usually black or silver. And then the lenses are usually like a very opaque, glossy black that does make me think even more about aliens.
Yeah, it's like Alien or Bug, kind of turning you into the Beetle, essentially.
Yeah. And a very iconic style from this time are Oakley's over-the-top sunglasses. I found a good think piece on the history of them called The Untold Story of the Most Bonkers Sunglasses in Olympic History. Because over-the-tops, they originally developed, and then they really pushed to get them worn for the first time at the 2000 Summer Olympic Games in Sydney, Australia. And they had runners wear them. And the piece details how like they're really questioning if they felt confident enough to like wear these, because they felt like if they were to lose wearing these, they'd look like a fool.
Yeah, they look really bad. Like it's just such a zany look. They said that like, I don't know, one of the runners who actually did perform very well wearing them, he said like the cheers were just immediate. Like when people saw them, like it's just such a little basic twist of like, you wouldn't expect the arms on sunglasses to go this way. But yeah, it just really like is what the time needed then. I don't know. I like them, even though broadly I really dislike Oakley, because I loop them in with like Lance Armstrong and baseball caps and the rise of helmets in pro cycling. Because Lance Armstrong and Oakley had this big partnership, two American companies basically coming into this very European sport. I think that they just kind of ended the like cool 90s period of cycling aesthetics, and then just made everyone look like bugs with their like big glasses and their helmets and stickers and stuff. It's just not as cool.
I didn't know this too. Like Oakleys are considered performance eyewear, which is a phrase I had never heard before this week. Because like glasses, I have to wear them as someone who needs prescription glasses. But like, you really think you're going to run better or faster if you have like really expensive Oakleys? Like, I don't really buy that.
Yeah, ever since I started biking more in the winter, like wearing contacts, like my eyes water a lot. So I bought these glasses called Stoggles, which look kind of like your glasses. They look like regular kind of conventional glasses, but they have little protectors on the side and on the front. But they look like tasteful, basically. And I'm just wondering, like, okay, these are perfect. Like my eyes, I don't cry anymore when I bike. Like, who needs more than this? Like, why? How much more performance can you squeeze out of glasses? And they describe like the Oakley's headquarters, like in the turn of the century, is just like, we were doing crazy stuff in there. And I'm like, how much coke were you guys on? Like, it's just sunglasses, guys. Like, don't get so crazy about it. But I mean, I don't know. They were blowing open a whole like new market. So I'm sure they're getting flooded with crazy amounts of cash. Like I'm sure they were kind of getting high on their own supply in that way.
This particular design did not go super far though. They only ever made 30,000 copies of the over the tops. And they're pretty expensive now. They cost between $1,000 to $3,000 each. And unfortunately, they made like a special issue of them in 2020. But they broke after only 20 were made. So we're not getting any more of these unless they're like off-brand.
Oh my God. I think there's always things so poetic about like the breaking of the machine. It reminds me of like the Luddites, the people who like broke the weaving machines to get their jobs back. And then also there's this family anecdote of when McNuggets first came out. My dad like begged my grandpa to take him over there, and then my grandpa tried one chicken McNugget, and he was like, "Whoever made this should have their hands cut off." That's what he said. Like, so we cannot make anything like this again.
Well, you know, now with the digital fabrication tools that we have, I don't really get why they wouldn't be able to just scan Oakleys and then redo them. Because like 3D scanners, like structured light scanners, they should be able to do that just fine. Maybe it's just convenient for them to be like, oh, actually these sunglasses that are cool, but we're not profitable for us. Yeah, we can't make them ever again. Sorry.
No, where's the imagination there? And then the next like portion of this aesthetically is outer space. Like this was, I don't know, I think one of the first times that space was back in the public imagination since like the heyday of the space race.
Yeah. And you can see this across a lot of different shows and movies, like pieces in media. Space Channel 5 is a very good example we'll get into, but there's also like Xenon Girl of the 21st Century, and then the artwork of Mariko Mori. And an example I thought of that was kind of a reach for me was I thought about Groove is in the Heart by D-Light, the music video. Because that music video, it's trying to sort of call back to multiple decades. It's a bit 60s, a bit 70s. It came out in the early 90s. But I did some digging, and I was shocked to find that D-Light, the main singer, was actually the inspiration for the protagonist of Space Channel 5. So in that game, Ulala is this like news reporter who needs to go and report on an alien invasion. And the alien invaders, she needs to beat them through dance battles. And it's very like campy in this 1960s way. It does.
It's mini skirts, and like everything seems very plasticky, and the color scheme is really zany.
Yeah, it reminds me of like Googie in the Atomic Age.
Mm-hmm.
And I made a connection in my head. I was like, I feel like it's there. And then I read into it and I found out that Kieran Kirby, the singer of Delight, she was actually contacted by the creators of Space Channel 5 to like use her song in the game and then maybe be featured in the game.
Mm-hmm.
She said no, I think, but then later on she was so unhappy with the game kind of resembling her likeness that she tried to sue them. Unsuccessfully, she actually lost like $700,000 in a counter lawsuit, or she had to pay it because she lost it. But yeah, sometimes with this podcast, I feel like I'm kind of reaching with some of the connections I'm making. But this one, I ended up being spot on.
No, you're spot on. And she's not the only artist involved with the video game. They have Michael Jackson in it as the character Space Michael, which is just very weird.
They used his voice or just his appearance?
His voice, his appearance. He's got a little Jerry curl in it and stuff. And this is like post-skin bleaching Michael Jackson as well, too. I don't think a lot of people were reaching out to him at that period. But I think that like Japanese developers, like, I don't think they had more forgiveness and appreciation of a zany character. Like, I'm using the word zany too much, but more appreciation for a character like Michael Jackson than America did at the time during all the lawsuits.
Yeah. Had you heard of Space Channel 5 before this week?
No, and I thought I had an above average knowledge of the forgotten Sega Dreamcast console. The Dreamcast in general is probably just the most Y2K console because its timeline lines up with it. It was released on 9/9/1999, I think in North America, earlier in Japan. Because the Nintendo 64, while definitely having some pretty like Y2K futurist games on it, like it was released in like 96, I want to say, so a little too early for the like zeitgeist of it. And then in America, the Dreamcast had these really kind of crazy ad campaigns of like, first there was hinting at the console of like not even showing games, and the theme was "It's thinking." They would say that at the end of it, like about the device. And then just a truly like, and the fact that it failed as a device as well, so it didn't have to like be updated like well into the 2000s, kind of keeps it frozen in this millennial bit, more so than like the GameCube.
And I feel like even the logo of the Dreamcast, it's like a blue spiral, right? Mm-hmm. That reads as very Y2K Futurism to me.
Yeah. And it's just, and the whole focus on dreams, I guess that's not always something in Y2K, but there is always an alternate reality. It's always taking place in a world like either in the far future of our own or adjacent to our own.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this type of like space travel shown in these like music videos is a very detached, it's not like a grounded space travel. I found like one music album, Solid Base was the artist, and they actually had like the space shuttle on there. I think this must have been before the Challenger explosion and all of that. Did I ever tell you that my elementary school mascot was the Challenger? The space shuttle?
Why?
I don't know. It's the weirdest thing. The Mabel Hogard, that was our school's name, Challengers. It's truly the most bizarre like mascot. I always wonder if I misremembered it, but no, it was like it was our chant and everything. It was just such a weird like early 2000s way to celebrate that.
That feels like a fever dream.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, I think maybe because of all the like tragedies involving the space flight in the turn of the century, I think the Endeavour was another space accident. But yeah, so I think that people wanted to kind of go back to like, no, this is like crazy 60s Jetsons type of space travel, not like, you know, the actual problems we're dealing with in the real world.
Yeah, because it's hard to remember and it's hard for me to think of too many specific examples. But in this period, 90s, 2000s, people were referencing the 60s a little bit. I oftentimes see this TBH with like gay designers. I don't know why they just were calling back to that time period quite a bit. But yeah, for me too, I hadn't learned about Space Channel 5 until very recently with TikTok. All of these videos started being posted with the visuals of Ulala and the game. And then the song that was being played was Breathe You In by Adore and Sipper, which I love. But I was very confused because the way they were promoting the song was like they released the first 30 seconds and then all of the post would be like, oh yeah, maybe we'll release the rest of the song. I don't really get what musicians need to do to promote themselves in this period of culture, but yeah, it was kind of a weird marketing strategy, but it worked. By the time it came out, I was very hyped for it and I do like the song.
Yeah. Space Channel 5 is just like, it seems like weirdly perfect for TikTok. Like I can't like it. Of course, it would be discovered. Like I know there's something also just kind of generally gay about it too. I think like the ultra skinny pop stars and like the dancing in perfect sync. It also has that like great uncanny effect of very low resolution characters, but very like high quality motion capture. Like the accuracy of the characters moving like is so different from the like actual look of the characters. It's why shows like Xavier Renegade Angel are so freaky to look at. Like I just think it's a very good effect when used.
Yeah. And the aliens in the game kind of look like blobjects to me. This is a good way to transition because blobjects are usually a designed product, often a brightly colored household object which has smooth curves and no sharp edges. The word is a portmanteau of blob and object. And I think these became popular around this time because this is when computer-aided design became more common. Like, yes, there are examples, I think, from the 80s and early 90s of CAD designs, but most designers by this point, I think, had those tools under their belt. And so they were able to create objects that had curved edges. So you start seeing them everywhere.
Yeah, it's funny, like, how, I don't know, technology is not a straight line in that way because the first things designed by CAD were actually very blocky. Like they were very like limited in that way. But then once that technology gets over their initial hump, then they become more curved than they've ever been. But yeah, a lot of, you can see kind of blobby things in the 60s, definitely, with like the egg chair and a lot of furniture in that period. And yeah, I think this goes back to that kind of 2060s feedback loop.
Yeah. And like Googie architecture.
There was definitely like
those
sinuousness
signs.
and curves. It was also a period of great like rectilinearity as well.
Yeah.
Very like rectilinear exteriors and blobby interiors.
Yeah. But I feel like also the 60s curves and undulating forms, they would stay a bit more orthogonal than what you see with like Y2K Futurism, where it starts to become like really like undulating, like with the work of Karim Rashid. He's like an industrial designer and architect who has a very like easy to recognize style. It's always very very undulating. But were you familiar with his work?
I guess I wasn't, but like now that I see it, like, oh no, I've seen it everywhere. And like it's a lot of like consumer products, like well beyond like obviously his heyday was like he was built for Y2K. He had a period before and has a period after, but like just his body of work around there is kind of crazy. Before, his work looks very like yuppie chic, like Frasier Bane kind of, which is the look that people say using a portmanteau of Frasier, the 90s like sitcom. But yeah, his like original works had like wood elements, which you would never see in his Y2K kind of stuff, where he instantly goes for pink and clear and like kidney shaped and just really zany stuff. Yeah, but then up until like 2014, like the bauble, which is that very curvy bottle with a filter. Yeah, like he just kept at it. But in an interview, he does admit that his work has slowed down, that like, you know, he's kind of past his time in that way. But he just seems like a character in general. He's surprisingly straight is one thing.
He is?
Yeah, he has had 2 wives.
He released like the gayest at-home workout videos during the pandemic. No, he would like post these videos of him like dancing to like Kylie Minogue or working out to Kylie Minogue, but I don't know. Maybe he's in the closet then.
He's just a certain type of New York designer guy. Like he seems like the character like Mugatu from Zoolander, the 2000s comedy that was like lampooning like the designers of the 2000s.
I imagine him being a nice guy though, like not having the standoffish energy of people in the fashion industry. Because I followed him for a while. I get the vibe that he like seems nice. Like he'll post pictures with people in public. We'll be like, oh yeah, this person spotted me. I wanted a picture with them too.
Is he wearing like a pink or white jumpsuit when he's in public?
I think so usually.
Yeah, because in all of his like photos, he's dressed like someone like on a space station.
It's interesting. I feel like once you get big in the art or design world, you kind of need to have like a costume
look
of sorts.
Yeah, an
like,
Anna Wintour like sunglasses deal.
Even with like the more famous professors at the Art Institute, they'd have like a look that you'd see them wear like all the time. I feel like it's a very intentional thing that they do.
Yeah, branding themselves.
Yeah.
Speaking of Anna Wintour, Ralph Lauren and Anna Wintour just got like the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Anna Wintour took off her sunglasses for
Biden. I feel like it would have made more sense if it was Trump because he's so campy. But yeah.
Yeah. But that's the thing about like Ralph Lauren and stuff is like both Trump and Biden, like, and their wives have like worn Ralph Lauren stuff. He kind of does bridge the gap.
Yeah. Wait, he's still alive?
Yeah.
How old is he?
He's late 80s.
Oh, that's younger than I'd think. I would think he's
his
like
son is like in his 60s and is involved in the company.
Because that brand to me seems like so quote unquote old money, but I bet it's not.
Yeah, he's just a guy from the Bronx. Like that's always like the greatest part of his story.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then so Y2K advertising. This was a very corporate leaning aesthetic. I think that ad execs and advertising creatives were having a lot of fun with this. I think it's just really fun to play in a world like wholly outside of our own. Yeah. In preparation for this episode, I kind of like destroyed my mind by just watching these YouTube compilations of Y2K futurist ads. There's 2 really big, good compilations. They also mix it up with music videos as well.
Yeah.
And I understand this is not the way that commercial breaks actually were in the day. So I actually found, maybe we can include a link to this, but just a actual ad break from like some random week in the 2000s. And that has more of a mix. Like not every advertisement was like people in space in metallic mini skirts, like, and chrome bubbles. Like it wasn't just that. You'd also get like a Cheerios ad where the mom is tired and the kids are like way too excited and the dad is grumpy, like, you know, regular schmegular American consumer stuff. So
Yeah, I think Y2K Futurism was used to sell products that were newer.
yeah.
And older products like say Cheerios, they didn't need to do that as much.
Yeah, because there's always going to be the balance of like you want to play to nostalgia sometimes, recycle an old ad, bring it back. But it was interesting to see like old brands like Tootsie Pop had a very like futurist Y2K space station ass kind of advertisement, and I'm like, no, bring back the owl and the naked child for some
Because
reason.
they had the owl when I was a kid. I felt like the whole time. I don't remember ever seeing any other ads from them.
Yeah, I think that it's just not suited for it. Like that's why it kind of failed. Like it was good for selling
Lindy
stuff.
ads for Lindy products.
Exactly. But like it was a very crazy Capri Sun ad, but that's a pretty crazy product too. Like it's in a foil pouch. Like that's not a format you've seen before. In the ad, two kids are in full like rad 90s type of rollerblading getup with the knee pads and stuff, and they go into a bowl and they start spinning and spinning faster until they turn into 3D chrome blobs, and then they shoot into a Capri Sun pouch. I think they become the Capri Sun.
Yeah, because people want to drink Quicksilver.
Yeah, I think it's all traces back to we all want to drink mercury.
Or colloidal silver. I've been watching the Love Is One documentary.
Yeah. We all have a deep desire to drink colloidal silver.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like there were other aesthetics at the time. Like there was the kind of extreme sports kind of thing. So yeah, there was a lot going on. I truly think I broke my mind in this. Like this was me in the throes of norovirus, just like lying on my side watching like as an iPad kid, like just hour-long 2000s advertisements.
It's nice that we can actually make observations though about the advertisements of the time, because I feel like I see so few now that like I couldn't make any observations about our current like advertising landscape. Because the ones I get are so unmemorable. I can't even tell you like the last one I saw. And then also we're not in a monoculture. So the ones I'm getting are like very targeted to me and kind of random. But my algorithm has no idea who I am at this point. Because, you know, 1 week I go from researching hunting to researching Italian futurism to researching like they can't figure out who I am right now.
No, it's true. Yeah. I mean, like, you don't have cable, I imagine, right? You know, just watch streaming stuff. Yeah, like
I don't even have like a like a contiguous Netflix account. I've like hopped around on different accounts. Like Netflix has no profile.
Just a hobo,
yeah,
just floating around. So the only time I received like cable advertisements is when I'm like at my uncle's or at my like grandparents or staying in a hotel for some reason, and it just feels like my monthly check-in with Normie America. And you see like, all right, what are they consuming? And it's weird to see how advertisements are like now mimicking TikToks. Like they have vertical videos in them.
Do they use the TikTok voice on TV?
Yes.
Really?
I have seen that. I have seen that. Yeah, like you mean not like the AI voice?
Yeah, the
like,
AI voice.
Oh, that I don't think I've seen that.
Okay.
No. But I've seen people doing the TikTok intonation, I would say, when they're like walking you through a product. Like, okay, I just got the most amazing gift from my friend.
Yeah.
No. So yeah, brain rot has like jumped the like small screen, medium screen barrier. And
there's still brain rot in the Cineplex, because I watched the movie Y2K a bit in preparation for this week's episode, because not that many movies appeal to me. With this one, the premise alone, Y2K, the year 2000, New Year's Eve, everyone thought the world could end and there could be a lot of disruptions in technology because of some coding errors and how they had designed the code. That was enough for me to be like, oh, I want to go out and watch that. But it was a really bad movie. I recommend no one to see it, because it kind of felt like a movie made for millennials in the way that like movies about the 80s are made for boomers, where it had a lot of crude humor, a lot of like throwback music. And then they had like a really lame celebrity appearance near the end. Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit shows up and saves the day. It wasn't funny.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I just hate Limp Bizkit. I hate Fred Durst. I feel like he's responsible like more than most for just like cultural decline and decay.
Do you think you might get a shout out in the article you're writing?
Maybe. We'll see. I don't know. I keep on going back and forth. I don't know. Limp Bizkit was on my mind because I just read this like random comment where someone was saying, when I was 15 in the year 2000, I thought it would be super cool if everyone had tattoos and smoked weed like my heroes in Limp Bizkit. I love that phrase, my heroes in Limp Bizkit, so much. And now that's come true, and I've grown up, and all the adults are trashy douchebags, and their children are monsters. It's like, I feel like we do have the Limp Bizkitification of America. Not to be a complete, like, grouch as I sit here in my corduroys and my Shetland sweater, bemoaning the state of society. But, like, I don't know, maybe I just felt especially grumpy and grouch-like this Christmas season.
I mean, another place to maybe look for that is Idiocracy. I feel like that would be kind of
that one. I don't know. That, like, Idiocracy has been like analyzed to death. Like, there's the the initial take of Idiocracy is like, wow, he was so right. We did end up becoming Idiocracy. And there's this other take that Idiocracy is actually making fun of the person who thinks that they're better than average people. Like, truly, it's turning the camera on you if you think that everyone else is like fat and crass. Like,
yeah.
But I don't really know if that's. I don't know. I like trying to get in the mind of Mike Judge, because I love King of the Hill. A lot of his work and Office Space and all that. He's like, I think, one of the greatest satirists of like recent history. But I don't know. I never fully know what he's like, whose side he's on sometimes.
Yeah. And one more observation from the Y2K film. So in it, there's a lot of really stupid condom jokes. It's also central to the plot. I don't even want to go into why.
Condom heavy movie. What the hell?
Yeah, they talk about it a lot, but it reminded me of the PlayStation 2 condom ad. This is a very Y2K advertisement, but in it you see like 4 condoms, each in the shape of the Xbox buttons. So like,
or the PlayStation buttons.
The PlayStation buttons. So like triangle, circle, cross, square. And it makes your mind go crazy places. You're like, why would you need that to be in the shape of an X?
This was that 2000s, like, just horniness that was in everything. Like the Axe body spray ads.
The Attitude Era.
Yeah, this was the Attitude Era of wrestling. This was just, I think, the beginning of the end. Yeah, this is going to be kind of the crux of the article I'm going to write soon. But what was happening?
Yeah, and for this week, I knew about this ad, but I looked into it further. PlayStation actually gave out promotional condoms. Like, I don't feel like we live in that world anymore, because back in the day, gaming was like, games were made for and targeted to like very aggressive teen boys, and like, Rockstar Studios with Grand Theft Auto and Bully, like that was their target audience. So they're like, yeah, these boys need condoms. Like,
yeah, I have a strong memory of like walking with my dad through this like rec center at the Air Force Base, and it was like, usually we go to the officers club, which is where the other kids of officers would all hang out, and the parents would drink, and I get my Shirley Temple, and it was really nice. But we went to this like rec center, and there was like a gaming lounge, and I was like, oh, I love video games, let's see this. And I just remember seeing a whole bunch of like shaved head young military guys playing Halo 2, which had just come out, like on the Xbox, and just seeing all the like purple blood exploding across the screen, and guys getting like mad and stuff. And I was like, this is not Mario. Like, this is something very different.
So they were like not kids; they were soldiers.
These are
okay.
Yeah, these are like grunts, as they would maybe call themselves.
I've heard that there are like military ads where they'll say like, "Oh, you can play video games here." And they're like using that to sell the idea of becoming a soldier.
Yeah, they've always done that. There was this game called America's Army that was like supposed to kind of like, Call of Duty did wonderful things for military recruitment, but like, I think America's Army was trying to be a little more on the nose on it, and really try and use that as a recruitment mechanism.
Yeah. Interesting. So I think a better example though than Y2K of Y2K futurism in movies is The Matrix. I think it's an example, though, of what's called dark Y2K, which if you look up on the aesthetics wiki, dark Y2K, they're getting that wrong. It was written by Zoomers. They say something about like stud belts and low rises.
No, that's more mall goth kind of stuff. Like they're getting their wires crossed there. Like dark Y2K futurism, where like instead of a shiny silver bodysuit, it is leather.
Glossy blacks, darker silvers.
Yeah. More urban settings than space settings, I'd say.
Yeah. Like
dystopian.
Some examples of this include like Super Duper Fly, Missy Elliott's music video. The Matrix is a really good example. But it makes me think about the like Zambel quote, with subcultures, utopia needs dystopia. There was a bit of a dystopian, like you could access Y2K futurism's dystopia side with a handful of pieces of media that explored like, okay, what if technology goes wrong? And that's really what The Matrix was.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, it was, I mean, a lot of stuff, we were referencing Star Wars earlier, but things always also owe a lot to Blade Runner a lot of the time, which was one of the first like, decayed utopia, dark future kind of things. And I'm sure like the Matrix owes a bit to that, but I don't know. It was really developing its own kind of language with it. I think that there is kind of this background in some Y2K content. It's like a low grade nihilism stemming forth from this idea of like the Matrix and simulation and all that. I was watching in my Y2K advertisement fugue state. I was watching a GameCube ad where the whole like tagline at the end is "Life's a game," in that voice.
Yeah.
I think it just kind of introduced this idea of like, what if everything is like not real or a simulation or a different world?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we mentioned on the millennial nihilism episode, there's been a slow accumulation of nihilism in our culture. I think we're a bit past the peak, but you would have been able to access it still around that time. But I think by the time Y2K Futurism ends with 9/11, that was such a shocking event that even the people who were optimistic were like really throwing a curveball, and they were questioning the way they viewed the world. So I think that in contrast, you know, in retrospect, like it doesn't stand out to me as being like that notable personally.
Yeah. And people like look back and kind of laugh at like the Matrix's idea of this like, I don't know, restrictive world that he was breaking free of just like what is this dystopia that Matrix Neo lives in, that he has like a boring yet well-paying white collar job and he lives in a kind of cramped apartment with computers. Like a lot of people would kill for that nowadays. But no, he was so ready to take the red pill and break free out of that. A rightfully forgotten movie from after the Matrix, kind of trying to cash in on it and truly at like the end or past the end of Y2K, is the Michael Bay directed movie The Island, starring Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson. Had you heard of this?
I definitely seen trailers back in the day. I rewatched the trailer, but yeah, I hadn't really known about it, but I was a little bit skeptical it was Y2K Futurism because it came out in 2005. But no, the jumpsuits, the color of metal technology, like it all really does read as Y2K.
Yeah, so the setup for it is, I had mentioned Logan's Run earlier. It's a play on that. It's a play on like the Matrix idea of your world is fake. And so Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson are these two hot people in this weird chrome world. They're all told that like there was an apocalypse and the world is contaminated, so they live on a space station, but every so often someone gets chosen to live on the island, the one uncontaminated spot. And so like they're in these shiny jumpsuits, and then the great twist is revealed, which is that they're actually clones, and the island is when your real life counterpart needs an organ. So they kill you and they pull your organs out. It's a very funny movie to look back on. Like it plays these two worlds and it's trying to kind of catch that Matrix kind of feeling, but both worlds are pretty boring. Like when he goes into the real world, it's like a near future light dystopia, I would say. They just like digitally impose like more high rises on cities. There's a lot of trains in it, at least. Yeah, there's trains. There's also like it's a Michael Bay movie, so there's car crashes and stuff. Yeah, and they do use like, you know, very like super basic color theory where like the fake world is very cool toned and blue, and then when they go into the real world, it's getting into that kind of like Michael Bay orange, that kind of recession era orangeness that permeated Transformers orange, all that stuff. So it feels like this is really straddling the two periods.
Yeah, and I feel like what I would like to see movies do is replicate the aesthetic, say, of The Matrix, or just how aesthetically consistent it was. But the thing that movies that try to replicate the success of The Matrix usually do is just recreate that like twist idea, and they usually fail at it. The only example I can think of that was trying to do the same thing later on and did it successfully was Inception. Not that I really particularly liked it, but it was popular.
I love that movie.
Oh, I haven't seen it since it came out, like in theaters.
No, I think it stands up a bit. I mean, there's a lot of like, it's not lazy screenwriting, but it's like functional screenwriting where like, you know, Ellen Page's only purpose in there is to just explain the like rules of the world to the viewer. Yeah. But no, it still goes high in my book. Yeah, this movie feels incredibly dated when you watch it, but it's only from 20 years ago. Like you could theoretically like do it again. Ewan McGregor would be like, you know, in his 50s, but Scarlett Johansson was 20 when she was in this. Also, the movie's horned up for her. Not to be all like age gap discourse and stuff, but I just kind of forgot. They make a big joke out of it of like, the clones have only been alive or conscious for like a few years, and so they know nothing of sex and all that. And then so once they're out in the real world, they start experimenting with that. And the movie has too much fun with that, I would say. Not to be a complete prude. Steve Buscemi is in it as well. And
he looks a lot less old.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
But the fact that this did come out in 2005 kind of shows that with these more quickly moving aesthetics, you'll get some weird kind of like last gasps out of movies, because those take a while to make and to get their like screenplays approved and everything. And also like buildings and cars, things that require like government regulatory bodies. Like it takes a while to get a building planned, approved, and let alone built. And then with cars, like, once you get something made, like you want it to have a pretty long generation, basically, because they're so hard to go back and do. So yeah, my 2007 Volvo, the movie The Island, and some buildings we'll talk about later are all like the final ones, because a lot of people pin down the end of this aesthetic to 2004.
Yeah. Cars have the most complex supply chains, fun fact.
No.
If we ever have a global supply chain crisis, those are going to be the first things to go.
No, that's what I was banking on. I thought about selling my car like in COVID when it was hard to get a new car and it was jacking up the price of mine, but I didn't make the move on it.
Wait, the price went down?
No, used cars went up because it was so hard to get new cars. Yeah, that like everything.
But did it go
booed.
Down now? Like you should have sold it then?
Things have stabilized a bit. Like, used cars are holding their value more than they should, and the average age of a car is creeping upwards. But that's just because people are facing the real costs of owning a car. One thing I started thinking about in this is like this, futuristic, very future-oriented in time aesthetic is very different from what was happening in the 90s, where whether it was grunge or Fraser Bane, these were very like warm colored, a little sentimental, but definitely seeking authenticity and like an actual place and rootedness and history, culture, connection, all these things that just do not matter to Y2K Futurism.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like the 90s were a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit less utopian. Mm-hmm. But then by the time Y2K happened, the USSR had collapsed for a while. Globalization was going very well. Neoliberalism was in full swing. And it was this very like politically peaceful period of time. And there's this really good article I once read called The Cyber Frontier in America at the Turn of the 21st Century by Jeffrey R. Cooper. He wrote that the reopening of the frontier in the 1990s can help to account not only for the unexpectedly strong and also still mostly unexplained performance of the American economy, it rekindled the optimism of the American people as well. Therefore, what we should be talking about is not cyberspace, but the cyber frontier, a powerfully resonant metaphor for this new territory.
Yeah, it seems like this narrative of the new digital frontier was so important to people that like the actual economic reality didn't matter at all. Because this was the period of the dot-com bubble and burst. Like a lot of early software, internet technology companies, it was just the Wild West. Tons of them were opening up and tons of them cratered. There was these companies like Pets.com, which had Super Bowl ads, and they had no like functional business plan of actually delivering pet litter to people. It's a very difficult thing to do with the current supply chain at that point. Yeah. But just the need for the frontier is greater than like the actual, like, it didn't matter if everyone lost money. Like, we're still moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then one of the things I wanted to talk about was the like few and limited ways that this aesthetic breached the kind of world of advertisements and music videos and was actually in the built environment. We talked about blobjects, so consumer goods, stuff around your house definitely fits this. But there were some examples of it like in architecture, more so in interiors, but actually like in real life.
Yeah. I've started to think about like whether or not Millennium Park might be considered Y2K Futurism because it was built for the millennium.
Yeah.
And I think it is. To me, the bean looks very ubiquitous. It doesn't
it's been here forever, it feels like, when it really hasn't been.
Yeah. But the whole park was built with a lot of new technologies, and it was made to kind of look futuristic, like Crown Fountain even. To me, it does just look like it's been there forever, but it has all of these like images of people spitting out water, and that would never have been made in the 90s or 80s.
Not the 70s, is what I'd say. But maybe tail end of the 90s. Like, I think there was some more fun with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, with structures like the Exelon Pavilion by Frank Gehry, like that's chrome. That's it. But that's the thing about architecture is that like there's so many other currents happening in architecture. It feels kind of separate from these like fashion discussions. I think architects would love to hear people saying like this, like, yes, we're very different from the kind of swingings of fashion. Like we are monks studying at universities and focused on the craft, coming up with these new movements and solving the problem of humans in space. So I think that they were kind of resistant to the more crazy aspects of Y2K futurism. But IIT, the school I went to, has a very Y2K building in it. It's the campus center. It's like our student activity center, basically. And it's underneath a tube that's built around the L train tracks. And just the vibes in there are crazy. There's all these like futuristic materials used, like these orange honeycomb-esque panels that let light through, so everything's awash. It's so futuristic they used it in that Divergent movie that was filmed all over Chicago. I think they just use it as some like space prison or something.
Yeah, I passed through it a bunch of times. I didn't realize what it was or when it was made. And it's kind of surprising to me that it was made in 2000 because the decision to build the building underneath the tracks and then also pay to enclose the area around the L, probably for noise, that just felt like a 70s decision. Like people had too much money. But
awash with money. I would say that, it's like a 60s kind of thing. But it's like, I think it's just evidence of like there was no other way to do that. Like the way the campus works, all the residences are on the east side, all the classes are on the west side. There were just parking lots in the middle next to the tracks, creating a very like kind of terrible heart of the campus that it was just like people would just walk through a parking lot to get to their classes. And so this was like the only solution that people could come up with. The programming and layout of the building is designed with human desire paths in mind, like the most common pathways that people walk. And then strangely, there's just structural support columns in the middle of those hallways sometimes, which feels very dumb.
So there are a lot of entrances and exits.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like a big hallway.
Yeah, basically. And then just like everything is kind of downstream from that. Like that was laid out first. And then so there's a lot of weird room layouts and stuff. And then they have these weird inaccessible atriums in there, which are just kind of like pieces of nature to look at. And one of them is big chunks of like glass or plastic, but they're see-through. And the idea is they represent icebergs that are melting. And that feels very Y2K, because this is when people were worried about the polar bears, like the melting ice caps, and the polar bears, like I guess, falling off of a piece of ice. Was the big environmentalist concern at the time.
I think it also might be because of like the clear craze too. Just anything that was transparent that is being very Y2K. But I didn't know what the inside of this building looked like, and it does really fit in with the aesthetic. Like, and the pictures online, it hasn't changed at all since it was built, it looks like.
No, I mean, they never really finished the building either. The idea was the idea was that you're going to have these mirror-like floors, and then the ceiling was going to be covered in wood. So that would be like a very witty twist on like, it would look like you had wood floors, but they were actually mirrors. And this is the kind of, I said witty because that's what postmodernists called that style of thinking in the 90s and 80s. They called it like having an element of wit in a building, which I always hate and rant against because you're assuming you've pulled it off. Like wit assumes that you have made an interesting and like pithy observation on the nature of materials and people and space and all that architectural jargon. Like, no, you just put mirrors on the floor. And then the story is that like the first time they cleared the mirrors, they ruined it. Like it's just, they're like a dull, unreflective finish. And then the ceilings are just like an unfinished drywall, like not even painted. They just have taped the seams between them. No wood or anything.
Yeah, I don't think like wood can fit into Y2K futurism at all.
It's like in bits of fruitage or arrow, you get some like appeals to trees.
I feel like bark, but not like
bark, but not just like a whole wood.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then another place you can actually see this is airports. So airports themselves, I think in this period were just in the broadly kind of late modernist, sometimes postmodern, high-tech architecture is applied to this sometimes. So it's a lot of chrome, it's a lot of metal, but it's not like super sinewy. It's getting into a bit of the blobcatecture, as they say, just like blobjects. Zaha Hadid, computers as design, buildings were getting more curvy. But if you just picture like a standard modern airport, like I just picture the ones of my childhood, like in Phoenix, and then McCarran Airport, now Harry Reid Airport. Architecturally, just kind of that. But the inside, airport lounges and bars are the few examples, like if you look on the Kari website and stuff, of Y2K interiors. I think that because this style is so cold and impersonal, you can only use it in the most fleeting of like experiences, like grabbing a
Yeah.
drink before getting on a jet. Like I think it gets old after about 2 hours like, of being in those spaces. Like so, it's just super transitory. There's definitely some like high end retailers that did this style at the time too.
Yeah. And I feel like they're connected too, because I feel like of all the elements, Y2K Futurism is most connected to air.
Yeah.
Like also with the song Just Breathe by Telepop Music, like that I feel like is the most Y2K futurist song.
Yeah.
Like it just and the connection is hard to sort of justify. I don't know why it was there, but it was.
Air. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And then like in airports, you said you hadn't seen these before, but
Oh no, I hadn't.
oxygen bars. So these were you'd sit up at a chair like it's a bar where you get alcohol or something, but they'd hook these was it cannulas or what they're called to your nose, and they'd pump like oxygen into there. And from the font to the actual design of these bars, it's just super like Y2K futurist. And I think it kind of almost alludes to like a future where air is not good and we have to like consume oxygen at bars.
Yeah. Well, yeah, putting those up your nose, it has had a connection with just like sci-fi and futurism for a while, I think, because of Frank Herbert's Dune, because of the people on the planet Arrakis, they have to put water or whatever, but I don't know.
Matrix too. He's got all the stuff shoved up him.
Yeah.
He pulls the cord out of himself.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of these before, but I was reading about how the air would have flavors.
Yeah.
And I was just imagining like, how can you ever think this was healthy? It's just like you're just smelling chemicals for $1 a minute. Like,
you ever see those IV bars?
No.
That's where you go there and they like give you an IV drip to rehydrate you. There's lots of them in Las Vegas. I actually have a friend from high school who ran one. But you had like to cure a hangover. They just like swap your fluids.
Do they also
out.
give you drinks, or they just have IV?
They just IVs. I'm sure they give you like an electrolyte solution or something to help you.
Something for like tourists mostly,
probably. Yeah. There's one in Old Town where I live, and when I couldn't hold down any water with norovirus and stuff, I was like, man, maybe I should go there. Maybe I should get some fluids injected. It's like $100.
Who puts it in your arm? Like the staff?
Yeah, the staff. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a lot of trust.
So weird.
Yeah, because aesthetically it looks more like a health spa, like tanning salon kind of thing, like not a medical center. So yeah, the intravenous part of it, I think they have a hard sell from.
There's so many ways to spend your money. But yeah, and then one final connection to airports is the work of the artist Mariko Mori. There's a bunch of examples of her on the Pinterest board, because her work, she has pieces that fit into many of the like sub-aesthetics or like categories of Y2K futurism. Like some of her art veers into the blobject territory with like or wave UFO, and other ones it sort of makes me think about the color scheme of like consumer electronics. But she has one in an airport, Miko no Inori, which is one of my favorite pieces that has ever been displayed at the Art Institute. Because like mid-college, they were showing this video of her in their like video gallery. It's her in an airport with a crystal ball scrying, and there's music that's like in Japanese, but I would go in there like anytime I had the chance, because I would use the Art Institute as a hallway actually, because it connects to different parts of the campus for SAIC. Wow. So I'd just stop in there on the way and I'd watch her. And it was around the time that I was on the Y2K aesthetic Facebook group, and it fits in just perfectly.
No, her work is really crazy. Like she really captures the moment, and she inserts herself a lot in her art, which usually annoys me, but she pulls it off.
Yeah, like a lot of her early work is cosplay, where she's dressed up as like an alien or an anime character of sorts.
Yeah, she really captures the time well. I think she was also like playing into a perception of Japan as being a very like big part of this futurist look.
Yeah.
And I was saying earlier about how like the desire for a future exceeds the economic realities of it. And I remember as a kid in this period being like, oh, Japan's so futuristic. It's where all my Nintendo stuff comes from. Like they have smart toilets over there. When really their economy had cratered in the 90s and never fully recovered. But I think that through artists like this, it became a very good kind of like national PR campaign of like, no, we're still the futuristic ones with the most technology, making the nicest TVs and all that.
I mean, is there any corner of the world that you feel like is futuristic in the year 2025?
Not in the ways I like it. I mean, Dubai is futuristic through the sheer force of, human rights abuses and
I don't think
oil money.
It's not like futuristic to me. I just see all these projects that look poorly planned and like they're boondoggles, and I don't think there is anywhere that I look to and I'm like, oh yeah, that's the future.
I don't know. When I see those videos of in the Netherlands, how you go to a grocery store and they give you a checkout gun and you just like check out stuff as you put it into your bag. That's the future I want. A very boring, efficient utopia. And those videos in the Netherlands where they pull an underground trash can out of the ground and load it directly onto the truck.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, just like public utilities and grocery stores. That's the futurism I care about. Like, not to be so boring and like stick in the mud.
For me, the only place I can think of where when I see images or videos of it, I immediately am like, oh, that's so futuristic, are like mega cities in China.
Yeah.
Like when I first joined TikTok, I was getting videos with like vaporwave songs of their skylines that were just doing all of these amazing light shows. And that to me got to me. But overall, I don't think I look anywhere in the world and I'm like, that's the future.
I don't know. I will say, anytime there's a sky bridge, I'm like, oh, that's the future, obviously. Like, it's just, it short circuits it short circuits my brain. Yeah. And I have seen some like viral videos of that. They use the Inception soundtrack, like the Inception reveal kind of thing. I forget what city in China, but this guy's like, you'd think I'm in a plaza, right? No, I'm on the 20th story of a building. And then it zooms out via drone footage and it shows that is the case. Yeah, I think that feels like the future to me. But actually, speaking of Grant Park, when I was like a kid visiting Chicago, I remember being on the north end of Grant Park and looking like the Exelon Pavilion and all those buildings, like the Blue Cross Blue Shield building and the Aqua building, and being like, oh, this is what the future feels like. Like, these buildings are taller than I can even imagine, and they're all made of glass, and there is just like that kind of concrete jungle with very perfect greenery there that, I don't know, there's parts of Chicago that feel like the meme of like, this would be the future if Bernie won and stuff.
Yeah.
Green pastures.
Because do you know when the Aqua building was completed?
Early 2010s.
Okay, it's not Y2K.
Late 2000s.
If you had told me it did come out around the early 2000s, I would have believed you. But
you know what? Actually, maybe, yeah. I think it is the late 2000s. And then, like as I said, with the sheer amount of time it takes to make buildings, especially high rises and getting them approved, like I'm sure the general idea of that sinewy aqua-like structure probably was from 2004, I would say, in order to get made in 2009.
Yeah, it was completed in 2010.
Yeah,
so.
I would say it's probably like a high watermark of Y2K futurism.
Yeah,
in a sense, and the name Aqua, like that's pretty on point.
Yeah, well, that was fun.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for discussing this on this week's episode with me. We're gonna have Evan on in the future. We're not gonna reveal the title of the episode yet, but we're very thankful to Kari and all the work that they've done. They made making this Pinterest board a lot easier.
Definitely.
But yeah, bye everyone. I hope you have a good week.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.